Question.
This conference will now be recorded.
And we're now officially being recorded. So for those that just logged on recently, if you're a member of the CAC, if you can please let us know through the chat window that you are here, that would be greatly appreciated. We're using that to track roll call, and we're going to get started here in about a minute. Thank you all for joining us. All right, I think we're right around 6:30 now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us for this forum here today. This is another opportunity for us to reach out to the community. Obviously, in this forum, in this case, we're doing it virtually, but this is another opportunity for us to share some perspective on topics that have been coming up as we're developing the general plan update for South San Francisco. We've had a couple forums to date. We'll get you acclimated to all that as well. My name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place. I'm part of the consultant team that's helping organize the community engagement elements of the planning process. I'm joined by members of city staff and the consultant team here as well as the panelists here tonight that we'll go through here together shortly. But before we get started, I just wanted to remind all that are dialing in, just for ease of efficiency, we're hoping tonight just to keep the Q&A function through the chat window. And for those that haven't had the opportunity to use chat in the past, the chat window is located on the upper right corner of your screen, and that will allow you to, if you click that window, it'll pop up the ability to leave questions and comments as we go. I'm not sure, did I just lose my screen?
Yep.
I did. Daniel, did you accidentally take over the screen?
No.
Is someone accidentally sharing their screen? I'm not sure what just happened right there. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that, everyone. Not sure what happened there. So as I was saying, this chat window allows you to ask questions. We're going to be fielding questions as we go. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Any comments, feel free to ask them. We're tracking all that throughout the presentation. And then during that opportunity to ask for the Q&A, we're going to be fielding those questions and answering as many as we can. We also have a phone number set up for those that have called in. You probably saw it as you called in, but there's a phone number set up if you don't have access to the internet and you're just listening in. You could also text in any questions that you have, and that phone number is 408-359-8621. So you'll have the ability to text in any questions that you have that way as well, and or leave a voicemail, and we'll incorporate that into the Q&A as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Costa-Sanders from city staff to do a quick roll call, because as a reminder, this is a meeting that's part of the Community Advisory Committee regular meetings. Every once in a while, we do these forums as part of a larger discussion, but it is technically part of their regular meeting. So I'm going to ask Lisa to take roll call of who's joining us from that committee today. Lisa.
Thank you. Lisa Costa-Sanders. I'm the project administrator for the general plan update process. And I'll go ahead and sound off who has joined us in this meeting. If I do not mention your name and you are attending, please note that in the chat window. We have Raymond Begg, Roderick Bove, Christy Camacho, Robert Cavallari, Nicholas Maiden, Julianne Murphy, Sam Shaheda, Bill Zemecki, as well as our alternates, Alan Wong and Eddie Flores. And we do have a quorum present this evening. Dave, you go to the next item on the agenda. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the regular minutes. Our last regular meeting was February 11th. If anybody would like to make a motion to approve those minutes, you can do so in the chat window, and then I will recognize the first motion, or if you have any comments, please note those also in the chat function. I have a motion from Julianne Murphy. Is there a second? Thank you. Roderick Bove is a second. If anybody has an opposition, please note. Otherwise, we will have the minutes as being approved.
Excellent. Look at how smoothly that worked out. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was great. That was great. It worked out very smoothly. So again, thank you all for joining us here today. Just a quick reminder of the overall agenda. I'm going to do a very quick synopsis of activities to date, where we've been, where we're headed. Then we have 5 esteemed panelists with us that'll go through 4 different topics here tonight. One is about the changing nature in retail. The other one's about life sciences in that context, and land use and how that fits within the overall framework of the city. Industrial trends that we've seen and kind of where that is headed. And then an overall just kind of general topic about local economic trends and impacts and how jobs and housing and land uses kind of fit into the general plan update process. And we can speak through that as well. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to leave a good chunk of time to have a Q&A with you all as part of this forum. So with that, many of you that are probably on the forum or on the call here today have probably seen this slide. Just a quick reminder of what the general plan stands for and why we're doing it. It's basically a guiding document for all policy choices and development applications and processes that come through the city. The big picture umbrella that will guide the future of the city over the next 20 to 25 years. It's really meant to capture the shared vision of the community, most importantly. So bringing together all the great ideas that we've gathered throughout this process and all the ideas that have come before it, and bringing that into one document that'll help guide future actions of this city. And it really means to kind of build off of community strengths, those that assets that the community sees in those areas that want to be preserved and places that want to be preserved. And then also addresses some of the concerns that might be out there. We've heard a lot as we've gone through the process that there might be some traffic issues to address, as well as other potential land use conflicts that we need to look at as we develop this general plan. And this is the opportunity to address all that. And then at the same time, it brings the opportunity to incorporate new ideas that 20 years ago when the general plan was done weren't necessarily hot topics, such as healthy communities, climate change, sustainability, social equity, environmental justice. So all that goes into this large policy guiding document that the city will look for to guide future actions as we move through the next 20 to 25 years. And as I mentioned, there's been quite a bit of outreach that's been done to date. We've held a couple workshops in the community really to kind of identify some of those concerns and opportunities and start to think about where throughout the city some change could happen. We've held multiple sub-area meetings throughout the city in different neighborhoods to really kind of dive in and understand key issues in those areas. We've done pop-up workshops throughout the community with different organizations, including the youth and other organizations, to make sure, again, that we're going out, reaching out to all members of the community. As I mentioned, we have the Community Advisory Committee, and that group we met with about 9 times now, and as part of that, we've done forums on housing and on transportation, and now this one on economics. And then we also held stakeholder meetings early on, really trying to get a broad perspective from the community and really try to reach every segment of the community, give everyone a voice to be part of this process. So with that, moving forward, we're now obviously here in May doing this forum, but moving forward, we're working with the team to develop land use alternatives that will really look at kind of the form and location of land uses throughout the city and how those are supported by transportation improvements, where amenities like open space improvements can go, and really start to think of how that kind of change can happen and where it can happen. So we'll look at that citywide. We'll also, and that'll be brought back to the CAC in a meeting in July, and then out to the larger community at a community workshop that we anticipate will happen virtually, given the state that we're in currently. So we'll have something similar to this. And then we'll also dive in and do sub-area meetings again, where we focus on specific areas around the city where we see maybe some of that change or evolution could happen. And again, those could potentially happen virtually, and we see that happening in the July timeframe. And then all that great information will be then taken to the decision makers in the August timeframe, and then back out to the community as we move out through the end of the year, so that everyone kind of has a chance to provide input as we move toward what we consider a preferred alternative. So that kind of takes us through the next several months, and obviously everything is very fluid right now with shelter in place and where we're at. We're very much hoping to see your friendly faces again in the near future, but for now we anticipate that a lot of this happening online through forums, through surveys, and other avenues, so that we can gather the great input that you'll be providing. So I want to keep that very short because, again, we have 5 great presenters here with us today, and I want to give them the floor and opportunity to do the presentations. And then again, I'm going to remind you that we're going to do the Q&A after their presentations, but we very much encourage you to use the chat function to provide input. So I have a quick bio to go through here, try to keep this short and sweet. We have Jeff Bodstubner who's a Senior Vice President at JL Commercial Real Estate. And he's with the real estate practice in the San Francisco Bay Area. His role is the market lead, which includes a representation of institutional landlords and national tenants, as well as recruitment and acquisition of retail talent in the region. Prior to joining JLL, Jeff led a boutique real estate firm in the San Francisco Peninsula that focused on acquisition and management of commercial assets. We have Theresia Namath, who is Executive Vice President and Regional Marketing Director for San Francisco at Alexandria Real Estate Equities, and she'll be covering more of the life sciences perspective. Theresia has more than 30 years of experience in real estate development operations, having completed 5 million square feet of commercial development projects, including several complex life science multi-phase campus projects in the Bay Area. What I found extremely interesting about Theresia is she also served as Special Assistant of Development to San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown Jr. and as a long-range planning director for the city of Oakland. So brings multiple perspective there. We also have Arian Hogan, who's also going to be teaming with Theresia on the life sciences perspective. She's an Associate Director of Local Affairs at Genentech. She's been with Genentech for about 9 years, and she came to Genentech with a blend of corporate and public sector experience, having spent early parts of her career working in economic development for the city and county of San Francisco, with a specific emphasis on land use and entitlements. She was actually raised in South San Francisco and is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara and Howard University School of Law, and she currently serves on several committees and boards, including the San Mateo County Economic Development Association and SPUR. So welcome, Arian. We also have Jason Cranston, who's the Managing Director at JL Commercial Real Estate, and he'll be covering more the industrial use perspective. Jason has a primary focus on industrial and R&D product type on the South San Francisco Peninsula, with experience on both the agency and occupier representation. Jason has represented and advised very top institutional real estate owners in the market, as well as some of the biggest and well-known occupier tenants in the region. And last but not least, we have Derek Braun, who's a senior associate with strategic economics. And Derek is part of the consultant team preparing the South San Francisco General Plan update. He is managing the strategic economic analysis, which will be followed by development of the plan's economic and housing policies. The analysis includes assessment of South San Francisco's economy, market conditions, housing affordability, impact of growth, and the impact of growth on the city's finances. And Derek has completed similar work on long-range planning efforts throughout the Bay Area and United States. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jeff to get us started with his presentation. So Jeff, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself, you are up.
Thank you, Dave, very much. Welcome everyone to this presentation. Looking forward to sharing a little bit of insight and some local facts about what's going on in the city, big picture. At the end of the presentation, we will be able to talk a little bit about what are things going to look like post-COVID for the retail world, which is going to be very different for the relatively foreseeable future. So Dave, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being the navigator on the presentation as well.
For sure.
Go ahead. So these are the topics that we were asked to cover that we want to be able to review with everybody on the call today. You can see them on the screen. Discuss how retail has changed and impacts to local retail over the last several years. That'll be good to talk about the evolution of the Northern Peninsula and what's happened to retail in that area in and around South San Francisco. Discuss what trends are anticipated for the region. I'll get my crystal ball out and do my best. Provide examples of thriving retail for cities such as South San Francisco, and how could those be implemented throughout policy. We'll talk about some examples of cities throughout the Bay Area that, in my opinion, have done a good job of trying to figure out what is the next level of retail and how do we provide something to our residential base that's going to end employment base to be beneficial. And then how will slow reopening of the economy impact retail in South San Francisco? That's my crystal ball component. So the first, and I understand this is small to see, but I wanted to throw some charts up to be able to give everybody a couple of synopses that really were taking place pre-COVID. The impact that retail has had and the evolution of retail has really been well evidenced in South San Francisco, where we have a local area that had been established for a very long time. Grand Avenue, for example, has been around a very long time, and that retail is in place. Then we've seen the juxtaposition of retail just over in Daly City. We've seen the evolution of some retail just down 101 in Burlingame. We've seen the evolution of retail with Costco coming in and Lowe's construction. So we've seen lots of things changing in the area. Specifically, what we've seen is a couple major things. Again, pre-COVID, which is a stark reminder to us, fitness had become a major player in retail. All kinds of dining establishments had become a major player in retail. We don't have to look any further again than Grand Avenue and understand how many new restaurants do we have in Grand Avenue, how many new breweries do we have along Grand Avenue. That was a textbook example of how we were seeing the customer's evolution of what they wanted in certain retail settings. In certain settings, for example, if you go just south down to San Bruno, go to the town center where you have Lowe's and big box, that's one setting that people like. The Grand Avenue setting was very much that boutique. I want to walk up and down. Those retailers that occupied Grand Avenue and some of the unique spaces in and around town, over on El Camino as well, really were made up of service, food, and fitness. We were seeing very few entries into the boutique clothing, women's gift shops, furniture stores. We were not seeing a lot of evolution in that, but in the smaller paces, it's there. The chart that is up on the screen was really an assessment of, in the next 10 years, where do you want to shop? And the message there was that folks want to be interactive. They want to be engaged with both the employees of the stores, but also with their customers that are shopping. In other words, they want to walk out of the store and see people. They want to sit down and not necessarily be in a store. They want to be out on Grand Avenue, for example, sitting down and watching people walk up and down. It also looked at some other components. And what that breaks down by is generation. So it really goes from boomers all the way to Gen Z. And in the subsequent reports that Dave will make available on the city website, you'll be able to see that chart a little more clearly. But the mandate is that 30 to 40% of the respondents were heavily weighted towards experiential. Thank you. No, it's okay, Dave. Thank you. The next thing that we were asked to talk about is, what trends are we seeing? And we say the region. I really tried to keep it to Peninsula, San Francisco, South Bay. I'm not talking about Sacramento, Marin, East Bay. I'm really sticking to where a lot of you live and work. So the first trend that we see out there is large-scale projects are going to dominate what we call the development cycle. I'll point to things such as the new Facebook offices that opened up in Burlingame out on the water just south of the city. We're seeing a major redevelopment going on down in San Jose, Santa Clara area where this picture is from. This is the related project down in Santa Clara off of Highway 237. We see Treasure Island in San Francisco going through a major redevelopment. We are seeing things in Oakland go through major redevelopments. We see the Concord Naval Base being driven by large master plan communities. And then obviously Google doing a lot of stuff in downtown San Jose, creating basically a new city on the outskirts of downtown. Facebook and Menlo Park, another good example. And then in South San Francisco's backyard, what we have seen with the biotech development there east of 101. I mean, that is some very, very large scale developments that are really driving the development cycle, which retail tends to be a component of. So retail will fit into certain portions of the biotech developments, for example. It'll fit within certain portions of this related project, but large scale developments are still going to go because those are developers typically that are going to be able to weather this storm that we're in right now. Go ahead, Dave. The second one is mall redevelopments are going to continue. Malls have become a bad word over the last several years, as many of them have struggled throughout the Bay Area. However, if you were to look around the Bay Area and step back, we've seen close to $2 billion worth of reinvestment in the malls throughout the Bay Area. Those dollars are being invested by very, very sophisticated landlords that are looking to accomplish some of the things that I mentioned earlier about what retail trends are occurring. I've got up here a reference to Stonestown Galleria, which was fortunate or unfortunate, depending upon what side of the coin you're on, to lose Macy's and Nordstrom within roughly 15 months of each other. And that was a lot of concern for folks. However, what they are looking at doing, or what they've already partially accomplished to rebrand and recreate this, is a great example of what you've also seen with Hillsdale Mall in San Mateo, what you've seen with Valley Fair Mall in San Jose. San Francisco Center in San Francisco continues to evolve, and Serramonte Center in Daly City has continued to evolve. So all of these destinations are creating a much more diverse shopping experience that is going to continue even as we are in this difficult time. Go ahead, Dave. Really related to what COVID has created amongst all of us as consumers is we're going to see big box users evolve, and the ones that were already pretty good are going to get a whole lot better. So there's obviously Amazon, which is creating retail stores, right? They bought Whole Foods, they're creating new grocery stores. They're going to continue to expand and be aggressive. You've seen Target, for example, start to create what they call city Target locations, or smaller facilities in the 20 to 25,000 foot range in an attempt to get closer to the consumer. IKEA, another great example, they only have a couple stores in the Bay Area that are very, very large, but they are looking at small concepts that are going to be in the 20 to 30,000 square foot range. There's a handful of other examples that are out there. Lowe's currently is exploring some small concepts to complement what their larger stores are. So these large box stores, one, have been able to weather the current storm, but two, have the ability to leverage a very sophisticated supply chain that currently is only served by large format stores. By getting smaller stores, that supply chain gets to us sooner. So what we've all experienced over the last 2.5 months, roughly, ordering something online, the fact that you can't get it the same day after 12 o'clock, sometimes we get frustrated, which is amazing to think of, that 5 years ago that wasn't really an option. The retailers get that. They're going to provide that better and better and better to us so that we have access to products that much quicker. But they're going to start because they're the large brands, and those are the brands that we all recognize, and they're going to deliver those products in a much quicker fashion with these smaller concepts. Go ahead, Dave. One of the other things is we talked about downtowns are going to continue to rebuild and continue to flourish. This was already a trend that was in place pre-COVID, right? People were having a harder time driving to larger areas, and it seems a little bit of a dichotomy to say, wait a minute, you said malls are expanding, but also downtowns are expanding, and they're both successful. And I don't think we have to look any further than a lot of examples up and down the peninsula. I've got a couple of very recent stories here up on the screen that talk about what cities are doing to be creative with their downtowns. Los Altos is very fortunate to have an investor in downtown that has very deep pockets that is facilitating some very unique developments. This one happens to be a rehab of an office building just off of Santa Cruz Avenue that's going to be a food hall. And it's going to be a cool little avenue for what for always was considered a very sleepy downtown in Los Altos. I've got a reference up here to downtown San Carlos that has already redeveloped Wheeler Plaza in downtown with a combination of condos and retail, but they're now taking the next step. What do we do with kind of the middle of it? Do we create a cool plaza that has a gathering point? Can we do functions there? All of these trends, Burlingame Avenue reinvested into their downtown with a very, very large and very disruptive capital improvement plan, widened the sidewalks, made parking a little bit more interesting. We are seeing many cities can still consider these investments into downtown to be beneficial, because then it facilitates that retail growth that we want to see. Go ahead, Dave. The next topic that the team asked me to cover is examples of thriving retail for cities like San Francisco, and how can they be implemented through policy. I mentioned Redwood City earlier. I happened to work for 5 years in Redwood City during the development of their downtown precise plan. It was amazing to be a part of and to see that development take place. That was a great example of a city council and a leadership team within the city all having the same goal and getting it moved forward. It did have several setbacks or some legal challenges. It took them about 7 years to get through, but what it delivered at the end over the last 10 years has been pretty dynamic. Pleasanton and Dublin have embraced the BART system. Sorry, Dave, let me continue to go through these. Pleasanton and Dublin, for example, have embraced the BART system out in the East Bay. They've really worked with developers to facilitate close-in development to the stations and front-facing retail for those. City of South San Francisco is doing a great job of that with the stuff up and down Grand Avenue and adjacent to the Caltrain station. San Leandro has taken a little bit of a unique approach. They've kept their office and their residential a little bit separate. Downtown San Leandro is really guided towards residential and retail. Adjacent to the BART system is really where they've pushed the office development, but they're still connected through some facilities of walking paths, et cetera, similar to the walking path and redevelopment of the Caltrain Plaza in town. I mentioned Burlingame earlier, and Cupertino's embraced the need for more retail services through the new development. They've really gone big time with not only Valco Plaza, which is going to be an amazing, massive redevelopment, a throw to one of those references I made earlier about large-scale developments, but even to a smaller piece. For those that have visited, they built a single level, if you call it mixed-use property, that's office, hotel, retail, restaurants, all in one project, but in a walkable setting that's not vertical. And I think it was very creative for them to do, and something I think that there are opportunities to do throughout the city here. Go ahead, Dave. The last question I was asked to address is, how will the slow reopening of the economy impact retail? Crystal Ball says it's going to impact it poorly. It's going to be hard. Every retailer out there, frankly, even the grocery stores, even though they're making good money right now and they're very busy, it has been an incredible challenge to deal with the coordination of customers and masks and logistics and supplies. You hear stories of guys like Trader Joe's. They don't even have stuff in their back inventory. They take delivery straight from their trucks out to the sales floors, how quickly they were moving products. So it's been difficult, even for the ones that are successful. This chart up real quick talks more about what are the job centers going to do. Jason and I with JLL both have offices we go to. Those offices have been closed, and we're addressing it just like everybody else is. How are they going to reopen? The long and story of it is that the job centers are going to be slow to reopen because they have to respect many of the guidelines that are in place. That slow rebuild of jobs in place is going to affect the retailers. The retailers that rely on lunchtime business and convenient shopping are going to be impacted for probably the next 6 to 12 months is our impact. We are going to see an evolution of what the retail stores look like. We're going to see an evolution of sit-down dining. The large-scale restaurants that seat 100 people are really going to struggle over the next probably 12 to 15 months as this goes. The fast food guys, the small QSR guys are probably going to come back a little quicker. The retailers that sell boutique items, I think about somebody like Bitters and Bottles, I think is called, on Grand Avenue. How do they keep only 2 or 3 people in the store at a time and only have enough staff that's social distance? That's going to impact their margins. So we're going to have to be very patient with the retailers. As a city, we're going to have to make sure that we're very patient on ongoing construction projects that these tenants are having to do to allow themselves to open and create barriers and alter storefront entries and utilize common areas, maybe out on the sidewalk for queuing. All of those things are going to require patience, and they're going to cause a very slow build. We see this recovery taking us a while, and I think the next 6 months are going to be difficult, and 2021 will be a year of recovery. That covers my topics, Dave. Thank you very much for the time, and I will be around for questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was excellent. And just as a reminder for folks, I see a lot of great questions coming in. We're going to go ahead and get through all the presentations, and then we'll come back and do the Q&A portion. We're keeping track of all the questions by topic as they come in and combining those with questions that we receive through email and text and others. And we'll do a full recap and try to highlight the key themes and read through a couple of these questions as well to get some of them answered as part of the Q&A. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much, Jeff. So we're now going to hand it off to Theresia, who's going to give us a larger kind of context about life sciences, and then she's going to tag team that discussion with Arian, who will give us more of a South San Francisco experience as well. So Theresia, if you want to unmute yourself, you are up.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Dave. And thank you everyone for joining this. It's a very awkward way of doing this, but we, I think, are succeeding. I wanted to talk about life science before Arian has a chance to show you what Genentech has in store, because it's a changing and evolving world, and has been for quite some time. As you well know, South San Francisco is known as the place where biotechnology was born. And in fact, that is true. It's also the place where biotechnology is changing. So life sciences, and you might want to go to the next slide. I think you've got some bullets for me. Yes. So the growth in the life science industry right now is coming from multiple sources. Initially biotechnology started out when the human genome was cracked and defined. And now it's really about that next level of work that is being done. And it's happening at very large companies such as Genentech, at Pfizer, at Merck, but it's also happening in these very small scale startups, which end up being outgrowths of researchers working at UCSF, at Stanford, at UC Berkeley in the Bay Area. We have a wealth of knowledge and basic science that is the hotbed of where this industry is going to continue to grow. And this is to really reassure you that South San Francisco is very well positioned to capture a lot of that continued growth in the life science industry, provided that you plan ahead for it. And so that's what this general plan is intended to do. I was asked whether there's a change in how life science is done. Wet laboratories versus dry laboratories. So a wet laboratory is your classic view of the pipettes and the petri dishes that you might remember from biology class. Dry laboratories are more like technology driven, hardware, computer, robotics, and those kinds of things. So there's both of that happening in the industry today. And we know this because we build facilities for biotech firms. And so that's what we are able to tell you, is that we see all of that still happening very much. In fact, there's quite an intersection now of technology and life science. You might imagine a diagnostic tool, for instance, that is based on genetic material, but that requires very large pieces of equipment to perform some significant diagnosis. There's a company called Illumina that actually does very cutting edge work in this way. And then the other aspect of life science that is in evolution is the precision medicine or translational medicine. It's kind of, think of it as almost personalized. It's bringing the research right to the bedside of the patient. And so really using the basics of research to find solutions at the bedside, not down the line, but quite immediately. So in a sense, we are dovetailing healthcare with biotechnology, and that's where the growth of this industry is going to go. And how appropriate is it that we are being faced with this COVID-19 situation? that biotechnology is really at the cutting edge of solving these problems. In fact, I can tell you that we have multiple tenants in our Alexandria portfolio around the country working on very many facets of this problem, including testing, diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines. So there is a lot of work that is happening to address this problem. And so maybe now, Arian, if you want to go to the next slide, Dave, I think Arian's going to take on where Genentech is coming.
That's great. Thank you so much, Teresa. Yes, Arian, if you want to unmute yourself, you're up.
Okay, great. So good evening, everyone. My name's Arian Hogan.
Sorry, Arian, if you could also bring your video up, please, that would be great.
Oh, I thought I did. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, there we go. So good evening. My name is Arian Hogan. I work in local government affairs for Genentech, and my role is to support our South San Francisco site. A little bit of history about Genentech is that we are almost a 45-year-old company. We were started in 1976 and located in South San Francisco in 1978 in a small little warehouse on the very east side of the east of 101 Oyster Point area. And in that time, we were an early pioneer. Many say the first biotech company, and we grown in place in that time. We've had a number of successes over the time. Many people think of us as a cancer company, company that focuses on therapeutics for breast cancer. But we do work in a number of other therapeutic spaces. We work in we have treatments for multiple sclerosis, for pulmonary emboli, and hemophilia, and we do a lot of really diverse work. Over the years, over the 40 plus years that we've been there, if you could change the slide, if you don't mind, Dave, thank you. Over the 40 plus years that we've been in South San Francisco, we have been incredibly blessed to be able to grow in place in South San Francisco. As I mentioned, we started out in a small warehouse, and today we are about, I'm sorry about the camera. It keeps jumping off, and I'm not sure why it keeps doing that. So I'm just going to keep talking and go with me and follow the slides. So we are about 4.7 million square feet currently today, over about 207 acres of space. And we have about 10,000 workers that report to the South San Francisco site. And so in that time, we've grown pretty exponentially. If you could switch to the next slide, please. We have a number of different uses on site. We clearly are a science company. We focus a lot on R&D. We have one of the largest single site research spaces in the world in South San Francisco. And so labs and R&D is really a large component of what we do, but we also focus on manufacturing on our site. We actually have a pretty significant amount of space, about 1.5 million square feet of space that's focused on manufacturing. We have office on our site. A number of actually recent projects that we've done have been in the office space. And we have a number of amenities that are also on site as well. If you could change slide. We are currently in the process right now, and some of you may have heard that we are looking to the city to extend what is currently our guiding document, a master plan which guides our growth in South San Francisco. It's really it allows a level of predictability about what, if we decide to grow, what that growth would look like, how tall the buildings would be, what types of buildings they would be, where they would be located, and sort of gives the city and us just sort of a level of expectation so that there aren't any surprises. Our first master plan was adopted in the mid to late 90s. Second was adopted in 2007. We are currently looking to get a renewal of that master plan. What we are not doing at this point is really looking to we're not forecasting what our actual growth is going to be through this master plan process. We're merely recommitting to a place that we call home, and trying to provide the flexibility that we need to grow in place. However, we are a company that has a very strong therapeutic pipeline. And so we do feel it's important to plan because, frankly, mature companies like ours do grow over time. And so there is the potential for growth over the next 20 years. We do expect that development will happen in the existing footprint of our campus. And we expect that growth will be within the existing local zoning restrictions. And we expect that growth will be slow and steady, quite frankly, if at all. As I've mentioned, we have a pretty large worker footprint and as well as a pretty large campus footprint. And so for a mature company like ours, I wouldn't expect for us to grow at a fairly rapid pace like some of our tech brethren to the south. And so I think that's pretty much it. I'll leave that there, and then maybe we can I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A period.
Great, thank you so much, Arian. And yes, as you mentioned, we will reserve plenty of time for Q&A. There's already a bunch of great questions coming in from the group, which we are very happy to see. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Jason. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you're up.
Great, thank you, Dave. I appreciate you having me this evening. Let's go to the next slide. So what I wanted to chat with tonight, talk a little bit about our diminishing building base as it relates to industrial, where these tenants are going, what does our industrial demand look like today? And then I want to introduce a new tool that JLL is working on called the Industrial Momentum Index, which really rates different regions in terms of basically consumer demand compared to the their industrial base. And then we did an interesting analysis, kind of a site analysis of having a facility that is intended to make deliveries to serve the San Francisco Peninsula, and having that site in South San Francisco versus Oakland and Hayward, trying to serve that same community. And then we'll talk about what the future of industrial looks like. So if we go to the next slide. So over the last 20 years, we have lost almost 3 million square feet of industrial base. And there is another 1.6 million square feet that is likely going to get demolished for new projects. And those would be Oyster Point Business Park, and then the area around Linden Station that is contemplated development as well. And then a lot of the life science developers own industrial real estate that was intended to be developed. So you can see about 70% of that base is intended for life science and office. But a new trend we're seeing is also to multifamily development. Next slide. So where are these tenants going? For the most part, this is just, we're tracking from 2008, but for the most part, they go to the East Bay, they go to the North Bay, or simply out of the area. And most of these companies are in the food and beverage industry, as well as logistics and distribution companies. Next slide. So this is what our industrial demand looks like today. We have basically three buckets. E-commerce, which is not just Amazon. As Jeff mentioned, there's a lot of emerging companies as our habits are changing and the e-commerce boom is occurring. It's not just Amazon, FedEx, UPS. It is Home Depot, Lowe's, Costco, a lot of big grocers, beverage, and home goods is a very big one right now. And then the next bucket is advanced industries. This could be green technologies, autonomous vehicles, drone companies, robotic companies, and then transportation. And this basically is a little of everything. It's the big Lyft, Uber, but also all these buses that are up and down 101 for Google, Facebook, and even Genentech. So, and then on the transportation front, there are autonomous vehicle companies and electric vehicle companies, kind of all emerging from San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Next slide. So here we are at the e-commerce boom. And this has been increasing year over year, the last few years. And this pandemic, as you can imagine, has accelerated the evolution of e-commerce by years, maybe even a decade. The number of first-time users has skyrocketed, and 83% of people polled that would normally buy goods in a store would now buy online. And this is we're not going back. So this has really kind of a new forum for a lot of our retail shopping. Next slide. So this is a lot to look at right now, but I'll summarize it. This is the new tool that my colleague Greg Matter at JLL has spearheaded over the last year with our research group. But basically, it's a measuring scoring tool that utilizes 48 different sets of demographic type data together to measure community fundamentals such as consumer demand, labor, supply, and then compares that against the region's industrial real estate supply. So, for example, the gray column there is what we call the composite momentum. So that is basically the community fundamentals as it relates to consumer demand. And we did a rating for this presentation using these 15 Bay Area counties, and we isolated North San Mateo County, which could be combined with all of San Mateo County. But as you can imagine, North San Mateo County ranks 4th out of 15 in terms of consumer demand, labor, what we're calling the composite momentum. But it is rated dead last in terms of industrial real estate. So if we go to the next slide, this is another way of looking at it. The diagonal line shows equilibrium. So you can see on the top right, as example, Alameda County is right on that line. It has very high composite momentum and a very solid amount of industrial real estate. And you can see North San Mateo County on that left axis, very high in demand, great community fundamentals, but lacking industrial real estate. So really, it's impossible and unlikely to get to equilibrium. It would take millions of new square footage of industrial. Next slide, please. Again, just another way of looking at this. The regions on the left, basically low demand and heavy on industrial real estate. And then you have equilibrium, and then the regions to the right have very high consumer demand and great community fundamentals and lacking industrial supply. Next slide, please. So this is interesting. We did a site selection analysis. We used 3 locations, basically a last mile distribution with the same routes along the peninsula and serving basically those routes either from a facility in South San Francisco as it compares to an alternative facility in Oakland, as well as one in Hayward. And so we use 1,500 outbound trips, 300 days per year. And basically, by having the facility in South San Francisco versus Oakland, it would save over 6 million vehicle miles traveled per year, which is a 37% decrease. And on that same note, eliminating over 20 million pounds of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the equivalent of removing over 2,000 cars off the road. And even more drastic, if this facility were in Hayward, again, serving the San Francisco Peninsula, by having it in South San Francisco, that would save over 13 million vehicle miles traveled per year, which is a 58% decrease versus having that same facility in Hayward. And the same equivalent to removing over 4,600 cars off the road. So really the conclusion here is that, ironically, by locating this facility within the community it serves, it reduces traffic congestion and is beneficial to the environment. Next slide, please. And so what do we do? Well, where land is scarce and restricted, but also like the San Francisco Peninsula, the community, there's so much demand. And so we think the future of industrial real estate will be new, modern, multi-story facilities. These will be constructed to have a very flexible design for multiple users for generations. They're going to have complex ramp systems to keep congestion off the streets. So vans and trucks can come right off the street and stage in the facility. And they're going to be sustainable. They're going to have a lot of solar, parking, et cetera. And all of these are actually going to minimize the adverse impacts on the community. Next. So the key takeaways are, while our industrial base is diminishing, there is a huge boom in e-commerce and even more of a need where industrial is becoming the new retail, how we shop, and with areas of land constraints and lack of opportunity, we think there could be good opportunities on larger parcels to go and encourage large-scale, multi-story, modern facilities. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Jason. That was excellent, and we have a lot of great questions coming in for you as well that we'll address after this final presentation. Now we're going to hear from Derek, who again is part of the the consultant team to give us the larger kind of perspective of how all this great information on jobs and the economy will kind of fit into how we're planning the next 20 years as we put the general plan document together. So Derek, if you want to unmute yourself, you're up.
Sure, thanks Dave. Could you advance to the next slide? Okay, so I think Dave nailed the purpose of this presentation, but to get there of integrating this great information into thinking about the general plan document, I'm going to open with a quick review of what is a general plan, talk about how these economic policies that are determined as part of the development process fit into the plan, and then also really talk for a little bit about the consideration of some of the trade-offs that come with decisions about economic policies, and touch on some major local economic conditions and trends that relate back to some of the content you just heard. So what is a general plan? Well, it's a state mandated document that cities need to have, consisting of goals, policies, and programs for guiding growth. Now, the state requires 7 mandatory elements shown here: open space, safety, conservation, noise, housing, circulation, land use. But cities have a lot of flexibility in incorporating other elements as well. So in the case of South San Francisco, there will be an economic development element, and we're on track right now to likely include a social equity element and climate change and resiliency element as well. But when it comes to economic policy, really a lot of that is expressed through the land use element and the economic development element. So I'll talk about those next. So the land use element is relevant to the economic policies in the general plan because it really describes how and where the city will grow. So, certain industry sectors are tied to different land uses that include commercial and industrial land uses. So that's how some of the economic policy making factors into the land use element. Moving on to the economic development element. So the economic development element, since it is an optional element, can really vary from city to city. It can really express what the city wants. So it will include South San Francisco's vision for its long-range economic growth and the policies for implementing that vision. Topic areas can really vary. It can include things like the mix of businesses and industries in the city, retail and services provided, supporting resident or worker commute needs as well, but also overlaps with the transportation, business attraction and retention efforts, efforts to assist the workforce and engage in workforce development, and then also to generate public revenues through economic development that will then support the city services for residents. So, on the whole, this is about thinking about how economic policy relates to where and how the city grows. Slide, please. If there's one thing that you take away from this presentation and moving forward and thinking about what goes into the general plan, it's that no economic policy decision stands on its own. These things always come with trade-offs. So you don't necessarily need to make decisions in the general plan based purely on the market or based purely on the highest and best uses for sites, but to consider holistically what the outcomes could be. So for example, economic diversity, which in this circle I'm showing here, could be the industry mix that is being pursued as part of the city's general plan. That translates into what kinds of land uses you have, which translates into the types of buildings that are built in the city or preserved in the city in terms of industrial buildings, office buildings, biotech buildings. And then those relate to the revenues, property tax revenues, sales tax revenues, hotel revenues, that then go to the city and support resident services. And then also the industry mix factors into the job opportunities for residents, whether if you have a diverse industry mix, that might mean more diverse job opportunities for the workers who live in the city. And if you have a lot of jobs that pay very high salaries in the city, then that could also have an impact on local demand for housing that impacts housing prices and rents in the city. So, no individual thread of this stands on its own. And I just want to emphasize the need to think about these trade-offs and how they flow through the general plan. Next slide. So having said that, the last general plan comes from 1999. It did have an economic development element. And really, a lot of this general plan was fulfilled. Some of the policy focus areas included building a biotech and R&D campus environment east of 101 north of Grand, where Genentech and many of the other biotech businesses are located. protecting industrial uses in the Lyndonville area and east of 101 south of Grand. The element also included downtown revitalization, development near BART, which was in a fairly new station, infrastructure funding and investment. And then the one part of this that didn't really come to fruition was the idea of developing a regional shopping destination, a major shopping center to the west of 101. Next slide. So that's all background, and that was the 1999 general plan. Let's talk about where the city is today and some recent trends. So South San Francisco is a major regional employment destination. The map on the right is a commute map. It shows the home locations of people who work in the city. You can see that they come from all over the Bay Area. The city has over 57,000 jobs as of 2019. Obviously, the current COVID-19 situation may be changing these numbers very rapidly. But regardless, the city is a major employment destination in the region. It has about, as of 2017, 1.6 jobs for every employed resident, which is comparable to the city of San Francisco and far, far higher than any other city in the surrounding area. Next slide. But the number of jobs isn't the only consideration. So we also have to think about the match between the jobs that are located in the city and the city's resident workforce, assuming that one of the priorities is to provide job opportunities for local residents. I think we've heard in some of the other presentations in prior meetings that resident educational attainment, education levels of residents in South San Francisco lag many other San Mateo County communities. Thankfully, South San Francisco does have a pretty diverse industry base, which does provide job opportunities for residents across a variety of skill levels. So you think about the fact that the city has biotech jobs, but it also has a lot of logistics and distribution and service and repair jobs as well. The education, well, the chart on the right here compares the education levels of the people who work in South San Francisco. So in that left column is people who work at jobs in South San Francisco versus those who have jobs and live in South San Francisco. And what this shows is that actually there's a pretty close alignment in terms of education levels between workers and residents, working residents of South San Francisco, but already about 69% of jobs in the city require some college, whereas about 67% of working residents have some college. So there's a slightly higher educational requirement for jobs located in the city, but it's pretty close right now. Next slide. So think about where jobs are located. The map on the left shows the subareas of the city as defined for this analysis. The chart on the right shows the number of jobs in those subareas. The top is the grand total for the city. You can see that the three largest employment areas of the city are east of 101 North, that sort of peach color, Lyndonville, that dark purple, and east of 101 South, that yellow color. And you think about what land uses are in those, well, it's a lot of the biotech, it's a lot of industrial, warehouse, distribution, service, and repair kinds of buildings. And really, I'm going to focus on a lot of the story between these different uses, since these are the city's primary employment locations. Next slide. So one way to look at analyzing the economy in South San Francisco, especially for a plan that includes a lot of land use consideration, is to connect the industries in the city with some of the land uses they're based on. It's just an efficient way of looking at this. So the charts at the bottom of the screen, those pie charts show the number of jobs in industrial-based industries. So think about things like manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution. And in the case of South San Francisco, biotech jobs too, because there is some industrial component of those jobs. You can see that in South San Francisco, about almost half the jobs are located in these industrial-based industries and biotech, compared to San Mateo County, less than a quarter of jobs. So South San Francisco has a very unique industry mix. Where it does not have a lot of jobs and demand is in what are called these office-based industries, 16% of jobs in South San Francisco versus twice that share in the county. Now these are where you find those tech jobs and professional services jobs. And so that's not so much a large sector in South San Francisco, and there's not as much demand for those jobs there. It's really more about the industrial and biotech jobs at this point. So then, let's look at some of these sectors. So the biotech and life sciences sector is a very unique business cluster. We've just heard about the history of Genentech and its growth in South San Francisco. The biotech industry now constitutes about 29% of all jobs in South San Francisco as of 2018, up from 26% in 2009. This is that sector that's really drawing those workers from across the entire region. And it's really very much concentrated in the east of 101, north of Grand area, both because of Genentech's early presence and expansion, other biotech companies attracted to that area, and the deliberate general plan, 1999 general plan efforts to accommodate those businesses. Generally, there's very strong demand for additional biotech space in the city. It's one of the world's primary biotech destinations, really. Next slide. So then I'm comparing and contrasting this a little bit with the other major use in some of the major employment areas of South San Francisco. About 22% of the city's jobs are in manufacturing, distribution, and service uses. These are those light industrial buildings, warehouse buildings that you see in Lindenville and other areas of east of 101. Really, the growth in recent years, and this was alluded to earlier, has been driven more by warehousing and distribution activities, not so much by the non-biotech manufacturing at this point. You can see in the chart on the right, the growth in jobs in warehousing and distribution that's really driving growth of this sector in general. So why are these jobs here? They're here because this is a great location for businesses that need airport access and also need access to end users of services throughout the region. It's a very dense area with a lot of households as well. Now, there is a risk of, there's strong demand for these uses, these industrial uses, but as was mentioned previously, it's hard for these uses to compete with biotech development and with recently housing development, because the businesses that are located in these industrial buildings often cannot pay the higher rents that would support developers wanting to come in and do a project in the city. And let's go to the next slide. So this map kind of illustrates the dynamics. There's a lot on here, but what you're looking at is a map that shows existing office or R&D, including biotech buildings, and industrial buildings, warehouse light industrial buildings, by the year that they were built. And so the blue dots are the office R&D biotech buildings. The pink to red dots are the industrial buildings. And the darkest blue and darkest red dots show what has been built from 2000 to 2019, basically the period since the 1999 general plan. And what you can see here is that virtually all development that's been happening has been biotech for all the reasons that we've discussed here today. It's largely been happening in that east of 101 North area. And I mentioned earlier the need to think about trade-offs. So there's some considerations here when thinking about these two different land uses for the general plan and what economic policies go into it. The industrial stock, these industrial buildings, they have a very important regional role in distribution, and those businesses benefit from the proximity to the airport. The industrial stock houses businesses that provide very diverse job opportunities at a variety of skill levels for the workers. The biotech buildings, on the other hand, generate very high tax revenues. They're very valuable buildings, so they come with a lot of property tax revenue for the city. They also attract very highly paid workers in many cases, and those workers in turn have spending power that could support reinvestment and growth in the city's retail. So this, again, just getting back to the idea of trade-offs when thinking about these land uses. Next slide. So just two more slides here, talking about retail and restaurants and then hotels. So the shopping centers, I won't rehash too much of the retail stories as you've heard it, but the shopping centers in South San Francisco primarily serve local residents. You can think about all those centers that have grocery stores in them. The one exception to this are the two Costco stores, and as well as a business Costco store in the city. That pie chart on the right shows taxable sales in the city, and that general merchandise stores category, that really big chunk right there, that's the category that would include those Costco stores. They generate a lot of sales tax revenue. There's other stores in there as well. Now the city's historic sales tax, taxable sales data does show that shift that was mentioned earlier towards dining and drinking and away from more traditional soft goods, hard goods, retail, bookstores, that kind of thing. Now, thinking about how to drive reinvestment in shopping centers and in downtown and to expand the retail demand in South San Francisco, one way to do that would be through residential growth. Ultimately, a lot of the strategy would need to involve adding additional spending power, buying power, and adding demand to sustain more investment in retail in the city. And I'll point out that retail is very important to the city's finances. It generates critical sales tax revenue that supports the city's services. Next slide. And closing on hotels. So hotels are, of course, not a great story right this moment. Performance of hotels in South San Francisco and across the region was very, very strong, historically strong prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course things have ground to a halt at this point. But this is a 20-year plan. This is a plan that has a 2040 date in the name. So it's important to think about the long-term assets and to keep sight of the long-term reasons that certain businesses come to South San Francisco or succeed in South San Francisco. So the hotels, they're there because they have access to the airport. They compete based on proximity to biotech employers that need to bring in a lot of people. And they also have easy access to San Francisco. So it might take a while for hotels to come back, but those attractors of visitors are going to remain in place in the long run. And I'll point out finally that hotels generate transient occupancy tax revenue, hotel tax revenue for the city, which is a very significant source of revenue for South San Francisco. And that's it for my presentation. So I'm looking forward to everyone's questions.
Great, thank you so much, Derek, and thank you to all the presenters. Typically, we're all in the room and able to clap. I'm going to do a little clap for everyone here. Thank you so much. That was excellent, and we received a bunch of great comments and questions from folks as we've been going through here, trying our best to categorize them. And now I'm going to try my best to read them back to you all, just generally based on your presentation. So we'll kind of go down the list. I'll ask a couple of each, and then we'll, depending on how much time we have, circle back. So regarding your presentation, Jeff, on retail, there was a question from Risha asking what about attracting art galleries for downtown and local use and more interactive and different than what exists maybe in some place like San Bruno?
I think it's a great idea. I think anytime we can consider diverse retail for any market, it's going to change the mix of what happens on the street and make it more interesting. The challenge that you have with a lot of galleries is that a lot of them are either operated by nonprofits or they're operated by groups that unfortunately can't pay very much rent. So that ability to find that use and put it in to the downtown is going to be driven by what rents the landlords who own those buildings are willing to accept. And if they are willing or able to get a higher rent from someone else versus subsidizing possibly a use like a nonprofit art gallery, that makes it difficult. There are a handful of galleries that are out there operating, throughout the Bay Area, up and down the peninsula, over in the East Bay. So this could be destination uses. What we'd have to create is a system where people that were looking to acquire that type of art thought of South San Francisco and wanted to come, for example, to downtown to make that search. Right now, that's not the case. Those folks looking to buy that are going to probably San Francisco or further down the peninsula.
Great, thank you for that. There's also a note that the Burlingame is cute, but their interesting parking is a nightmare, at least pre the situation we're in now. And there's a hope that we're considering non-painful parking, as we're calling it, along with development.
I will say one thing to the staff that happen to be listening: please put parking meters that allow credit cards. Burlingame has a couple of lots that I swear they purposely have those meters that are coin only, and I've gotten more tickets down there. So yeah, parking is always a challenge in downtowns, right? I think that South San Francisco has done a pretty nice job with some city lots that are in and around downtown, and you can frankly park a block or two away and get access to it. It's a challenge for every city to get there. So managing how long you can stay at those parking stalls, having some of the parking structures that exist in downtown with very reasonable rates is great. I've even seen some multifamily developers put in some ground floor retail parking for the retail that can be open during certain times. I know that's difficult here. And street parking on Grand Avenue would be great to have, obviously 2-hour limits that allow lots of turnover at very affordable rates. Throughout the city, the traditional shopping centers, parking's not an issue, but downtown, we're going to have to keep an eye on that.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. There's a comment that just came in too, that could we have more public gallery areas owned by the city as well, as an idea. So I'm going to go ahead and transition now to life sciences. Again, we can kind of come back if there's more comments, questions that come in. But I believe this was maybe for both Teresa and Ariane, is what role should office and R&D developers and tenants play in the provision of housing for employees? Any thoughts there?
I'll take a stab at it first. We are essentially a builder of commercial space. We don't typically build residential. However, we certainly partner with residential developers, and we do feel strongly that in the general proximity, especially of the Caltrain station and closest to downtown, would be a fantastic location for residential, even east of 101. And it's, we've done projects in San Francisco in the Mission Bay area where it's a mix of uses very close by with residential and life science, and that's worked out very well for us. We haven't built the residential, but it's been really positive. We have a lot of property in Boston area, Cambridge specifically, and that also has a mix of uses very close to ours, our residences. So that is a very effective way of reducing traffic situations, as I see it.
Great, thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, I'll also take a stab at that question. So for Genentech, housing and transportation are two issues that are near and dear to our heart. We sort of look at it as in sort of two different ways. I mean, one, it's from a business standpoint, it's an attraction and retention issue. Directly because their ability to attract and retain talent depends on the ability for people to find housing here that's competitive with other regions in the United States. I would say indirectly it's about the quality of life in the Bay Area. I think that one of the reasons why people like to come here is because of the diversity here, and to the extent that that diversity is eroded, because there isn't enough housing to maintain the socioeconomic diversity that the Bay Area has been known for, I think it does challenge our overall competitiveness as a region. With respect to actually what our role is, I think our role is to be a partner with a city like South San Francisco to see what we can do with respect to housing production at all income levels. And we're certainly exploring ways that we might be able to take that on, particularly around the Caltrain station, which seems to have a lot of opportunity for residential development.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, and on a similar topic, and I think we might have answered some of this, was whether there's concerns about placing housing east of 101 near biotech. And I think you both kind of dove into that a little bit. And then as a kind of addition to that, what services and amenities are needed to support those businesses and employees in that area?
If I can take that question a little bit. With respect to the mix of biotech. I mean, there are different elements of biotech, and there's certainly the R&D component. There are different types of R&D that Teresa talked about, and then there's manufacturing and other elements of the industry of what we do. I think one of the unique things about our campus in South San Francisco is that we have a diversity of uses that makes us pretty unique. I think we're part of a larger global network, and I think within our larger sort of Roche family. We are probably one of two sites around the world that actually has manufacturing R&D office, like sort of all in one sort of little microcosm. Manufacturing is a little bit different, I think, than just sort of pure R&D, although R&D has its own complexities within it. And I think to the extent that housing is, I think we Genentech really would like to see housing in the east of 101, but it has to be done pretty thoughtfully, because, people don't necessarily like smokestacks. There are things that happen within industry that aren't necessarily residential friendly. And so I think that there has to be some thought about what type of R&D it is. And, how do you sort of build in buffers so that you preserve industry and are able to develop housing at the same time?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move on to a couple questions for Jason. Then again, I see other comments and questions coming in. Thank you for that. We'll loop back. But on that subject of industrial, Jason, there was a question that said, sounds like the center of commerce will be services that are supported by food and retail. What kind of services can we encourage?
Let's see here, services and, can you say that again?
Sure, the question was, or comment was, sounds like the center of commerce will be services that are supported by food and retail. And the question was, what kind of services can we encourage?
Well, let's see if I'm understanding that question correctly. In terms of manufacturing, we're not going to see large-scale manufacturing in this area, as it can be done where there's cheaper real estate and cheaper labor. But we are going to see, we're seeing more food manufacturing, and those, that is really intended, unfortunately, to service restaurants, hotels, schools, but also, grocery delivery to our homes. And that, it's all coming down to the e-commerce and the demand and the way our habits are changing.
Okay, thanks for that. And there was a request if you could provide an example or two of multi-story industrial buildings per some of the conversation that you provided.
Sure. So this has been going on in Asia for 25, 30 years. We are starting to see it in the United States. We're starting to see it in very areas, dense populated areas where there's little opportunity and a lot of competition for land, such as New York. There are several projects that are in process in New York. Washington, D.C. is another spot. And in fact, the first multi-story building in the United States was built and completed about 1.5 years ago in Seattle. And that was done by Prologis. And actually in San Francisco, there's a project being contemplated as well. So I think where land is scarce, and there's definitely demand on these larger scale parcels that are zoned appropriately, the market is lacking new products, let alone multi-story, but just new product alone. Most of these buildings, as Derek showed, were built before 1980, and a lot of them in the 50s and 60s. So we just need new modern product to serve today's demand.
Great, thanks, Jason. I'm going to ask just one more question. It's kind of tied to that. It's really thinking about local jobs and wages. And the point was, we have heard the industrial and service buildings in South San Francisco provide middle wage jobs for South San Francisco residents, and we were wondering if you could provide some insight on whether South City residents work there, and the wages and what the wages are for these jobs.
I wish I could answer that. I'm not certain what the wages are, whether minimum wages, but I think there's a good mix of medium wages and lower wage jobs, depending on what the company is, and there's a wide range when it comes to industrial. There's more of a high tech, and then there's more of the service type jobs.
I think more importantly, do we recognize whether there's actually South San Francisco residents that work at these places, or do we have a sense of that?
I don't have that data on hand, but yes, absolutely. I mean, just my experience alone, there's a lot of jobs for South San Francisco residents in these facilities.
Great.
I'll just jump in quickly and say, we actually have done some analysis of the occupations of residents in South San Francisco versus the county, and some of the change in occupations among South San Francisco's residents over time, and also of commute patterns. And so from the commute patterns, I showed that map that showed that people come to jobs from all over the Bay Area to work in South San Francisco. We also mapped where people who live in South San Francisco work, and there are a lot of South San Francisco residents who work at jobs in the city. It's actually a kind of a tighter commute area for where residents go for their jobs. It's still all over the region, but it's much more concentrated compared to where people come from. And then in terms of occupations, I can't say exactly who's working where in a given occupation, but we definitely see that the city has more people engaged in things like transportation and material moving occupations compared to at least the county population as a whole, which maybe isn't that telling, but we have a little bit of data about this.
Great. Thank you for that, Derek. Yeah, I probably should have geared that question more towards you. You've been doing a ton of research on that front. Actually, moving on to your presentation, we had a few questions here. With the slide that was referencing the economic policy trade-offs, there's a question of kind of how does quality of life fit into that, and does it get folded into the housing prices and rents? It's a tricky question.
Well, I'll take the second question first, which is the quality of life factor in housing prices and rents. Well, it's definitely a positive. That is something that could drive up, could benefit, could increase rents and housing prices. So that's why it's important. This kind of gets back to a previous community forum around housing, but I think that's why it's important to think about tools to ensure that everybody can stay in the city and participate in that improved quality of life, can afford to remain in South San Francisco or come to South San Francisco because it's a great place to be. As far as, sorry, what was the first part of the question?
No, I think you pretty much, you tackled that. And a question that came actually around the same time was regarding the land use by employment. And the question was if we're out of balance regarding the different job sectors that we're currently looking at.
I think that this is where, I think that's a question that I can't answer. I think that that's where we start to get into the realm of some of the decisions that will need to be made as part of the development of the general plan itself. It's certainly, as I mentioned, a very unique mix of jobs, in many ways a very diverse mix of industries compared to other more tech-driven locations all down the peninsula. We work in a lot of these communities. But the decision about which industries to prioritize and what that means for the city, that's up to the residents of the city. What we will do as part of the consultant team, putting that hat on, we're going to bring as much data and information to this process of making those decisions as possible, including things like fiscal impacts of growth and things like benefits and drawbacks of growing different kinds of industries.
Great, thank you, Derek. There's a lot of short questions that I'm trying to get a better sense of that I have a feeling a lot of these questions will come back and answer as part of our kind of summary. But there's also just general questions about how the situation we're in currently with COVID-19 impacts kind of where we are today and what we're thinking about in the future. And there was a comment that, is the past experience going to be what we will see in the future, given how COVID-19 downturn is hitting us? Can we, I can't understand that word. Can we learn basically anything from this experience? Meaning kind of the future trends in business. It's a larger question that I know is kind of hard to tackle, but anyone want to take that one on? No. I mean, we're all learning as we go here. I know it's a fluid situation, and that is, it's a great point that we definitely have to think about. We're definitely still thinking holistically, optimistically about what the future holds, especially for South San Francisco. But we definitely will be learning as we kind of go through this downturn and how that'll impact us moving forward. But just want to recognize that we hear that and will be considered as we move forward here. And also just kind of larger, bigger questions about the general plan itself and the targeted completion date. We are looking into 2021 as we kind of move through this process. That it's kind of fluid and changing as well. We currently have mid to the end of 2021, and team, correct me if I'm wrong if that's changed, but that's what we're generally looking for the completion of the plan. We're going through the stages right now of developing the alternatives. We'll reach the preferred alternative hopefully toward the end of this year, and then move that through the decision-making process after we've shared that with the community and have a chance to provide input into 2021, which will probably take us into the early to middle of 2021 before it's complete. And there's also just a general question whether these presentations will be posted to the website. Yes, they definitely will be. We are actually recording all this right now, which is the great silver lining in doing these forums virtually. All of this is going to be recorded, posted to the project website, along with all of the summary of the discussion and everything that came out of the Q&A process as well. So let's see, if we have about a half an hour here, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I might just jump back up. Some questions came back in following up on your presentation, Jeff, and I might just highlight a couple here. One was, what do you think about requiring ground floor retail in mixed-use multifamily projects, and what impact does that have on project finances?
Usually hurts the project finances because the retail is a throwaway for most residential developers because the majority of their money is made upstairs, not downstairs. So the residential developers a lot of times will do it reluctantly because it's not their expertise. Ground floor retail is good in the right areas. There are certain areas where maybe the retail isn't facing the right street or doesn't have any co-tenancy. And so I think you have to be careful with where the retail is quote unquote forced to go. I think the natural shopping streets and lines should be encouraged to have retail, Grand Avenue and some of the others in downtown. I think you have a pretty good core there. If you were to go, beyond the downtown and you're on major thoroughfares, you're on an El Camino or something like that, ground floor retail is fine. Ground floor retail off of major streets is difficult to do right now. And the retailers will typically struggle in those environments.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. There's one follow-up comment on the art galleries, and that was, could you imagine buildings and art communities that have a holistic approach to South San Francisco as a destination? Also, there's numerous retail spaces near downtown South San Francisco that have been empty for years, and it's hard to believe that just landlords are being picky. The city can encourage empty buildings to get market clearing lease rates. So I guess kind of to encourage more of that that flavor with art galleries and similar type uses.
Yeah, and sometimes vacancies aren't necessarily landlords being unreasonable. It could be the building is not in good condition. It could be that the space needs substantial handicap upgrades or code upgrades that make it not reasonable for other retailers to occupy. I like the idea of community gatherings, and that's something maybe for the city to consider in community areas where city has control of a large common area that could be rotating and stuff. But to be in a retail setting with a rent paying, the business plan has to be solid to either justify the landlord bringing them in or for an art gallery to buy their own facility.
Great, thank you for that, Jeff. Jumping back into life sciences, there was just a general plug that can we make the Genentech ferry service an all-day service for all people? Any thoughts on that, Erin?
I would say that is not my strength to talk about the Genentech ferry service, but I would say it is a pretty expensive service to operate, and if such a service were to move forward, I think there would have to be a general discussion about demand on an all-day basis. So I think
great, thanks for that. Let's see, there's moving down here on the industrial commercial presentation for you, Jason. As companies are adjusting to having employees work from home or remotely, how do you see the demand for commercial office space going forward in South San Francisco's ability to attract new businesses?
Yeah, there's two schools of thought. Things are definitely not going to go back to normal. We're going to phase back into the office. Although a lot of companies are stating that their employees in their businesses are highly functional and productivity is good. A lot of companies are not going to force their employees back to work if they're not comfortable. But at the same time, we've seen the office industry sort of scale back in square footage and lease smaller spaces where they call it hoteling, more of an open environment where people are closer together. They're using the same phones, plugging into the same computers, spending a few hours and leaving. So, you know, that's going to change. I think people are going to want their own space and maybe go back to private offices, in which case companies may need more space. So I think we're going to see a mix. Definitely the two sectors of real estate that are going to fare the best as a result of this pandemic are life science and industrial.
Great, thank you for that. And this might be a tougher question to answer, and I don't know if city staff might want to, or team might want to weigh in, but any chance that some of the industrial areas are going to allow the building of residential housing, specifically in the Lindenville area? Anyone? I mean, that is a question that we are going to jump into and start to identify as part of the next phase as we move towards releasing the alternatives that we come up with as we dive into some of these sub areas. And we'll definitely have kind of more to report back on that front, unless anyone has anything they'd like to add here. Yeah, that's the report I'm getting back from the team as well. So we'll definitely have some answers around that as we move towards the next phase. So please stay tuned on that front. Most of the other questions I think were generally related to what we've covered here. And again, there will be more opportunity for us to kind of come back and answer some of these questions and or report back on what we heard here as part of the summary. So unless there's any other final burning questions that you all have that you might want to address through the chat window, I'll give you a couple minutes here I might turn it back over to Lisa to close us out. Any other thoughts, folks? Before we close out, I want to thank you all again very much for your input and for taking the time to be here with us today. And thank you again so much to the presenters and all that you've done to put these presentations together. Super helpful to help kind of, again, we're all learning here as we go, but it helps us kind of have that common vocabulary as we move further into the general plan process and we look into the alternatives and the economics and how all this kind of fits together. So thank you for all your time. So with that, Lisa, I think I'm going to hand it over to you. I had this up as the reminder of how we communicate. Lisa, any final thoughts? You want me to go ahead and wrap it up?
I could very briefly wrap it up. I do want to also thank the panel and David for facilitating. Also wanted to let everyone know that we had approximately 71 attendees, which is pretty excellent. So well done on that, as well as several council members. So thank you everybody who attended the meeting. We have no further staff comments to report. Are there any CAC member comments? And if so, please do that in the chat window. Okay, I think everybody's just thanking us for the presentations, and the presentations have been posted on the website. So you have my contact information here, and the project website is Shape SSF. So you can go to that and you can take a look at all of the presentations, and we'll also have the questions and answers. So that concludes the meeting, and we'll go ahead and adjourn it at 8:10 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.